of ash and flow. This is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around to listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome again, Ute, to this new episode of Unbillable Hours. And extra double thanks for coming back and joining us for this one. I wanted to try something slightly different, so not interviewing you again, but maybe inviting you into a group discussion around the following idea. I had some conversations last week, and they're still ongoing, on how do you, if you work in the marketing function of a consulting firm, how do you help the business, the practice, win bigger deals, right? So, and that is, Ute, as you can tell, that is closely related to the account strategy questions.
Oh, yeah.
We discussed with you, right? But the conversations I had were much more about what does marketing do? How does it help in terms of how do you come up with an account-based strategy, or how do you help the practice shape their narrative, or sort of get noticed for being able to do bigger things? Because the presumption, I think, here is that the firm has already gotten into the client, or they've already been hired, maybe on the back of an RFP process. They've already done some work and it's all going great, so the relationship is improving, the client is quite happy, all these things. And now the question is, given that that's all the case, so how can marketing help the practice to maybe expand that relationship and have conversations about bigger things? And Ute, you explained your process for like a deliberate account strategy, which had many more pieces than just the marketing piece. But I figured it's maybe interesting in this context to talk about messaging and having a messaging framework, because I felt that is something that marketing can do, because we can come in and say, if you wanted to convince that client or the C-suite in that client, we would have to present a compelling narrative, right? Position us as someone who can do a bigger, more transformational work. And maybe, I don't know, just maybe it helps to have the framework for that story in place, so we can all work together to build it out over the next, 3, 6, 10 months, right? So slightly different, but also very similar from your approach, not having a account strategy as defined by you, but sort of a story strategy. Marketing shows them how a good story should look like, and then the business has to help fill it out. Does that make any sense to you, Ute? I don't know if the way I'm explaining it.
I think it makes total sense. I mean, when I'm thinking about an account strategy, it stands and falls with the way that you tell it to somebody else. Actually, any strategy does. So making sure that it's presented in a way that it can be easily understood is so key to anything that you do. And this messaging that happens on so many levels as you develop an opportunity and lead it into the pipeline until it finally becomes a win. Super interesting process. So I'm very keen to explore it with you today.
And I just want to preface this, because I'm experiencing this deja vu recently, and I've also experienced this plenty of times in the past, where we need to get your stakeholders in place. I know I repeat this thing all the time, but you need to have your stakeholders in groups, and you need to plot it so that you know what your deliverables are, and you know what your key messaging, what you're speaking to each one of them, and you're hitting those points, because doing it badly will end up with you having 50 or 60 individual stakeholders, and you're not sending 60 different messages about 60 different flavors of it. You need to bundle this up, and this is something that now, through conversations that I've had in multiple places, professional services firms really do badly in terms of communication.
Interesting. Yeah, I think there's 2 points in what you just said. One is usually if you go after bigger deals, that means you have to deal with bigger buying groups, right? Ute, I don't know if you have any numbers in your head. I did some research prior to this, and I found a stat that said the average buying committee for 6 or 7 figure deals these days is 6.8 people and growing. I don't know if that's makes any
I'm
sense.
not surprised at all. Yeah, it sounds about right.
Yeah, and apparently, so the article I found, and I gotta go back and find the source, but they wrote about how that number is now even increasing faster, because during COVID, everybody got used to video conferencing. So there's no more additional cost to adding someone to your buying committee, right? No one has to fly around and book a hotel or anything. So groups are getting bigger because it's so easy to just bring Jane or Jeremy on so they can have a word, right? And sort of that's the thing. So that's one thing, and you're certainly right there, Ash. It's very important to have a feeling for how these people are. But then also there's this, you and I talked about this, there's this multi-level aspect of the buyer and the user, I think we called it, right? So the group that buys the consulting service, usually not the people who then end up with the results, right? If you digitalize a manufacturing plant, yeah, the CEO, the CFO, the CIO buy the thing, they buy the project, but it's the workers in the plant who end up being the end customer or the end user of whatever it is the consulting firm is doing. So that's like an additional layer of complexity, right?
I completely agree on all those points, Flo. But I'd like to hear Ute's take on, like, getting the ducks in a row before you start the messaging.
Yeah. I think before we go there, I think, Flo, what you were outlining in terms of who are audiences of the things that we are doing, in order to get a 360 view, you would also need to add the people that the buyers are reporting into. Because the bigger the bigger the stakes, right? I mean, there is this kind of making careers, breaking careers aspect of some of the deals that you could talk about. So yeah, definitely.
Interesting point, yeah.
And that ties nicely into the conversation we had with Such feels like years ago, but it's just about 2 months ago, roughly.
Yeah. Which, by the way, that sort of also was an influence on the messaging thing. I'd like to show you guys for feedbacks, and also I can find a slide and put it into the show notes for people to look at, because I tried to get to the story-driven process. I basically cobbled together a variety of storytelling frameworks I have been using before, and to call out the two most important ones. People in marketing might know there's the story brand framework invented by an American, I think, called Donald Miller. He's written a book building a story brand a couple of years ago. He now has an entire consulting business helping people put that framework into place. And that is very much, he sort of uses the classic sort of hero's journey structure. People everywhere across cultures have used to tell stories. He contextualizes that specifically for business, and I think it's a very practical, very helpful framework. But that thing then runs head on into the issue you guys just referenced, which is if you go for big transformational deals, there's never just one hero, right? Mm-hmm. There's always multiple buyers, there's multiple people. So how do you tackle that? And that's why I'm experimenting with sort of hitching Miller's framework to something that a person named Andy Reskin and some other people do, which is it's called strategic narrative. That would be the second framework, because that tells a story of a major change, of a major disruption that is afflicting an entire industry or an entire company all at once. And the idea is, and then I'll pause there. The idea is that if we can cobble those two together and we start building out our account story or our deal story by trying to become able to describe a major change that afflicts everyone we're talking to, from the CEO to the junior analyst in the client firm, right? That change has to be always true. We can then that gives us something to talk about, a context to talk about that's true for everybody, no matter what. And we could, we could then go into buyer persona specific sort of hero story arcs, Donald Miller's style. That's sort of the idea. And I'll pause here and let you guys react to that. I don't know what you think of it, but then I have a practical example if you like.
I'd like to hear Ute's take, and then I have like a hole and a plus in what you just said.
Okay.
All right.
So, Flo, when you started by saying, okay, this hero journey is difficult because you have multiple heroes, my first thought was, okay, we need parallel tracks then. But this framework that you are describing now here around a change and how to tell the story for that, that's really intriguing me. And yeah, let's dig into this.
So here's the hole with hero's journey, Flo. I'll start with the negative because that's easier. Hero's journey is cyclical, okay? You have to end pretty much where you started in most cases. So You're starting with a change, you're going through the whole thing, the change journey, and ultimately giving the value prop, which then leads back to a change. If it doesn't necessarily lead back to a change, it kind of implies that your buyer's journey is finite and it closes. And that's not how large professional services work. It's usually continuous sell and upsell and building and growing accounts. So it needs continuation. It's cyclical. It needs to fit that one. Now, the plus here is that a hero's journey doesn't require multiple protagonists, because you have your hero or your group that can be classified as hero. Then you have the support characters. That's what the journey is about. You've got your mentor, you've got your sidekick, you've got all of those. And all the various roles that you talk about fit within that. Take, for instance, you're talking about like a CTO kind of journey, right? You've got the CHRO and CMO probably as sidekicks, and you've probably got the CEO or CIO in this case probably more as like mentors. So everyone has a role. You don't need to like mess around with that framework. But what you do need to make sure is it's cyclical, because if it's just a unidirectional thing, it closes, and that's not necessarily.
I hadn't thought about the cyclical nature, but I think maybe you can just do that with the thing I've cobbled together. I shouldn't even say I cobbled this together, sort of logical how it clicks into place, but that is an interesting one, because you're right. So you start with a disruptive change, and then you take actions which of course also sort of require change. People listening now cannot see the slide, but I have to put it in the show notes. If some of what you reference here is just that's maybe just because I work with Miller's framework, and then I hitch that to the other thing. But if you allow me to maybe give an example of how you can tell this plays out is, and again, also this is Andy Raskin talks about it, so it's not even as if I found the example. But if you look at what Mark Benioff did back in the day with Salesforce, right? He had this story he told about the end of software. I don't know if you guys remember this, but it's actually true. Salesforce ran around and evangelized the end of software for about 10 years, and never invested much into Salesforce brand marketing. And they didn't even almost tell their own story. Benioff just talked about the end of software. That was in my cobbled together framework, that is the big drastic change and disruption that happens. And what Raskin explains is what this type of change, why this is elegant and why it works, is that wasn't a made-up thing. It was very much true, and it was observable by the time Benioff referenced it, because software as a service was a thing already back then, and it was sort of slowly growing. And any contemporary of Benioff might have said, okay, end of software. Like the idea being here, sorry for context, that the time where you buy single licenses software, right, and on CD-ROMs, and you install that stuff in your own data center, that was ending, was what Benioff said. People might have said in his times, well, that's a bit of an extreme, but we can definitely see the SaaS stuff is growing. So the change was true. It was observable. He didn't have to explain much about it. And it would have happened, it would have disrupted industries, whether Salesforce existed or not, these are the three criteria Raskin has for a good sort of change. So, and once you do that, and I don't want to go into the full Miller framework, but that's the idea. So now he has a change that is true for everybody, no matter who he talks to. And from that, he can spin off various versions of the story. He can say, here's what the end of software means for the CEO. Here's what it means for the head of sales. Here's what it means for the DevOps guys in IT, right? He can sort of craft stories that follow from the big one. And he doesn't have to do too many modifications to your point, Ash. Like, it's not as if you have to write something from scratch every time. You just have to maybe change the pain points you're talking to as you go about explaining the change, or you have to maybe change your call to actions or your benefits a little bit. But the big story by and large remains the same. And Ute, I mean, I've talked for quite a bit now here, but I felt like if I had this structure or this logic in place even before I began to work on an account plan like you devised, the guys in the business could have this in the back of their minds, right? As they work with the client, go through the client's company to spot opportunities, to think about, okay, what could be a big change here we could talk about. Like you could collect all the information that you have to use as an input if you were to create that story.
Yeah.
And bring that with you in an account planning session like the one you have you described in the episode we had you on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is an essential input. So just going through what is going on in the client's world from different perspectives, like what's happening in their macro environment, what's happening inside the company, what's happening with their competitors, what's happening with, I don't know, their supply chain, etc. So there are so many different angles from where this change story can find its way into the account strategy. Absolutely. So in a way, and this is interesting. So these account planning meetings are actually all about sense making of these many different storylines that are floating around in the universe.
Yeah.
And you begin to create signal from noise. Yeah, this is kind of what the session is about then.
Yeah.
You were going, Flo?
Yeah, I just wanted to. I have a question because I saw this and I felt, and this is I would be interested in your guys' take on it. I saw it and I thought, okay, cool. If I can show people this story framework, if I provide them a lens through which to view all this information they see, as you said, it was a day in, day out on the client, right? Mm-hmm. Because then they know what type of exercise we have to run, because this is a sense-making device, this type of storytelling framework. Yeah. So I equip them with the framework even before I have the session, like long time before, to make things easier. What I was wondering then afterwards is, or am I constraining them too much? Does that make sense? Like, does it really help to give them this in advance? Or maybe because they only look for stuff that fits that structure, they might be missing some stuff. I don't know if you have a view on it.
And it can really go either way. So I would definitely give it a go. It's an interesting approach to finding out what is going on in a client's environment. So 2 aspects that I'm seeing. First of all, as a consultant, you always need a framework in the back of your mind to be quick on your feet and ask the right questions. Yeah. But this, I mean, kind of, how can a consultant live without a framework? It's like a fish without water. No, but it's kind of key to have this in your briefcase all the time and just be ready to ask the right questions when the opportunity arises. So this is super helpful to have it. So I'm saying it can help to uncover blind spots that you might not have explored before. The second thing is, and this is so interesting, is also turning it around, asking the inverse question and finding out how is this narrative being told in the world of your client. So just take the example of the end of software. How are people going about this? Yeah, are you saying, okay, this is the end of software as we know it today, so we need to change that? Or are you saying, oh, look, everybody else is moving out of that market, so we are staying now? I mean, it can go crazy ways, and it's just interesting to explore how does the client perceive that.
So I have something to add, Flo.
Yeah. Yes. Let's go.
Well, how you need to look about it, my view is, are you doing it as go-to-market or are you doing it as go-to-client? Because I think they have 2 different approaches. If you are trying to equip, this with the person, because this is, as you show it, it's not as flexible. It's more fixed in terms of your framework. So depending upon who you're approaching, is it a targeted approach or is it like, the market approach? You need the fixed and flexible framework for this to go, because if it's market, flexible, but if it's client, could be fixed, it could be flexible, because you probably already know what their problem is when you're coming in. You don't just, it's very rare that you go completely blind, but then again, you have sales pursuits there. So there is that issue. So I would look at what my, people are trying to do before like equipping them with, a fixed framework.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And Ute, I think the 2 of you seem to point to the same thing. Is we have to be very clear that this framework in your back in your head, it has to be client specific, but it cannot only be focused on their business as it is today, because otherwise you'll miss a lot of these. Ute, you talked about the SWOT analysis and the look outward and the look into the market in the future. Like you're going to miss that stuff if you're too much focused. So I think it might be interesting to, you guys have actually given me an idea. I think it's interesting to, I'm making this up as I go along, to think of the change we want to see. I guess that has to be true for the entire market, or at least the sector you're working at, the client is operating in. Maybe the entire world. I don't know. I mean, Salesforce's end of software was practically, that was that was everyone, right? It cannot be, oh, Miller Incorporated is going through an M&A deal and that is the change for our story. No, that's probably not big enough. I don't know.
Let's take it to the hero's framework itself, Flo. Let's do it. How does the story begin? The hero is used to their regular world. Now they are suddenly thrown into a different world.
Because
that's
of the
an
change.
easy disruption. That's an easy way to enter. You don't need to like go into this whole framework. It's just like, what is the disruption? Start from there. Start simple.
Yeah. And I think the way Miller describes it, he says that's my one critique of the Miller framework. He's not even that keen on the disruption or the change. He just says if you describe your ideal buyer, you got to be very clear on what it is they want. But he doesn't give the why behind the want, which is why I added the narrative, this change thing in the front. But the idea would be, so I think to keep sticking with the Salesforce example. So that was the end of software was going on, right? Mm-hmm. So the CFO probably says, okay, that's interesting. I want IT costs to go way down, right? Which is a different one from the CIO who probably says, but wait, lots of my fame and power come from having a big data center. I don't want to see this go away. So he wants to safeguard his position despite all this cloud stuff coming in. And so I think that is how Miller looks at the ideal buyer. He says you got to be clear on what they want because of the change. And then but you're right, it's always good to start with the disruption and then go in and think about the things.
I think change and want can be two very separate things. Mm-hmm. So the objectives that are put onto this buyer might even be completely contrary to the change that's coming their way, right? So it's still important to analyze it both ways.
Their want might be to fight it. You're right.
Yeah. More often than not, that's the case.
and even when you're thinking about like specific buyers, right? Like you have to think about where is the the P&L there on in a way. Like if you're going to the R&D side, if you're going to the cost center side, right? You got to come in thinking about what is the, like, say it's an R&D function. So what's the non-qualitative cost that you have? We can help you reduce that.
Yeah,
that's a way of entry. So I completely agree with Ute.
That's a very good one, by the ones. Just want to call out. I really like that because that's a good operationalization of the want, right? You could just look at who's the ideal buyer and which numbers do they own. Because that is what, by and large, this will be, at least in the logical end, this will be what they want, is make sure I hit my numbers, whatever the numbers are, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at the P&L and go into the buyer group, then you have like a much better say in sales. And this is where marketing can come in to get the right message in, because that's where your story is. Your story is, not your story, your hook. Because if you want them to buy, you need your hook. And the disruption comes in. That's your, the setting. And then your hook is that specific part. And then you can build your narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, so translating it to the account planning process, it's like, what's the objective? What's the change coming their way? And what are they equipped with to deal with the change?
Yeah, exactly. And then the one thing, I mean, I don't want to go through Miller's full framework, but what I like a lot is that he also says the wants of the buyer should also be internal motivations, which are usually very, very different. And from just the logical solutions. And everybody who has read like even an article about neuromarketing knows that is very important, right? And consultants often forget that. We often speak about the logical reasons for why you should buy our service. Like you can lower this cost or you can drive that type of growth. But we rarely look at the internal personal motivations of the people we talk to. Whereas in reality, that is a huge driver of their decisions. Even in B2B context, it's just a fact. I think it's a JP Morgan quote, like from the actual guy who used to say, men usually have two reasons for doing something, a good one and the real one. so that's just calling that out, because that's also another aspect why these frameworks might be a bit helpful. It focuses your attention on stuff that you might overlook otherwise. If you just go from so the number they own, brilliant stuff, but then also look at what is this person going after? Like maybe they want to hit their numbers so they can have a shot at getting from head of operations to COO or whatever it is. I'm making this up.
So there's something I just want to add into there is when you go pursuing the client, right? You got to look at their North Star, not your North Star. By that I mean, It could be a person, like, a few people that we've invited. It could be a function, but the North Star is almost always visible when you like look at the client. And when you're equipped in that way, you can come in, because consultants should always remember, as they're coming in from the outside, they have the advantage, because most companies don't really want to hear their own people. They want to hear people, a second opinion. That's where they come in. And that helps you both in your marketing message as well as, in your pursuit.
It's funny how similar both processes are to each other. This is what's currently going on, like in my mind, where I try and bring it both together. And it is so similar. So I think from building strategies for what your client as a whole organization might be doing in the future, to translating it for individuals, the account planning process that I've worked with in the past is actually doing all the prep work that a marketer can then take and run with. And I think throughout this entire process, as I said in the last podcast where I was invited as a guest, it's actually so important that marketing has a seat at that table to help craft this clear message really from inception all the way through to creating clarity for all the different buyers that you want to reach, talking about the change that's going on in their world and that they need to deal with somehow. So I think marketing, again, catalyst for clarity in the whole process, and then also helping further along with the messaging towards those clients that you want to reach.
Interesting thought. So we could, you say it's so similar, I feel the same. Maybe, and I like the structure you just gave it, which saying it creates the input. Maybe I need to sit down with pen and paper and see if I could map the exercises and the steps you've outlined in the process you usually drive against these. It feels like it could be done pretty cleanly, but I have to take a look.
I agree.
All right. So that's interesting. Maybe a bit of a change of step today. It's it's more of a work in progress of stuff I'm thinking about right now. So I don't have it. It's not finalized, but thanks for giving me some some good points there to think about, YouTube.
But if you do have time, in your experience, Ute, what is the best collection of kind of messages that resonate with the client? Like what have you seen kind of like working better? I mean, just like, what is the kind of position ingoing position that, someone from marketing helping a consultant go? Yeah. What have you seen works nicely?
So I think what always works best is when you have a very clean story that connects all the way through, from really top level corporate strategy to what this individual needs to reach. And clearly showing the path in between, all the hurdles, all the obstacles, all the equipment that they have along the way, speaking about, a hero's story and the hero journey that they are going through. And the more you can cleanly outline how all of this comes together and supports them along the way, leading to how you are going to support them, that's always a winner.
And also sounds like it's a lot of prep work, which is great.
Oh, it is. It is, but it's worth it, definitely. It's a total step change compared to, okay, here's an offering, do you like it?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So, Flo,
Ash,
what's your thought on how you take this?
For me, as I look at the entire framework, the biggest opportunities are in, as we said, I think all of us said this, like clearly framing the disruption in a way that's not sort of made up or cheesy, right? That's like what the Benioff example is. I like it so much because what this guy did is he spotted something everyone saw. It was out in the open, but he framed it and named it in such a clear way that just made it powerful. So that's a good one. Then I think the second thing is we touched upon this, the ideal buyer, maybe looking into the internal motivations of buyers as well as just the numbers and the pain points. Yeah. And then the last big thing is how do you then, because that's the next step in Miller's framework, is once you had messages around the buyer, sort of spoke to them, who they are, what they want. Next thing is you have to present and frame the problems which will get in their way as they go towards what it is they want. right?
Mhm.
Like, so you are the CIO. I guess you want to hit that number. Yes, I guess you maybe have this and that personal motivation, right? You want to be seen as the one CIO who finally digitalized the whole business. Yeah, okay, also cool. Okay, now I have to talk about and frame the problems. I think, right, because that's the differentiating message for me as a consultant. So, okay, if you want to do X, here is what I think you'll have to deal with in order to succeed. And I think these three, for me, these would be the hardest problems of the messages that I think if you could get those right, your chances of actually securing that bigger deal get significantly better. I don't know if you would agree.
Oh yeah, I would so agree. And this dialogue that you've just sketched out there, it's a perfect co-creation workshop. It's exactly that. It's like, okay, what's happening? How can we piece it all together? What do you want? How can we make it happen? Etc. So, it's probably about involving the client also in developing their own story and helping them with the sense making along the way by doing these joint co-creations. And as a result of that, also co-messaging sessions. I think that's core and center to the account methodology and also creating these stories here.
See, that's another good idea. Taking another note. Like, I like the co-messaging session. Hadn't thought about that, but it's cool because it goes back to Ash's point that the people have to, the stakeholder list is long, and I think Ute, you said it. Sometimes people have to report to people. Like, we are not the only ones who need good messaging to get the big deal, right? The people we talk to and sell to might have to make the argument for working with us internally also.
Yeah.
So it's good to equip them with a crisp story as well.
Yeah.
This nice. This is getting to a place I like. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So how about this? This is a really good session for us because it's not just a podcast episode, Ute and Flo. It's more about like, how do we actually come up with messaging? We're all storytellers. We're all marketers. We're all in this busy professional services environment. And we're trying to help ourselves, our listeners, our consultants, and even clients come up with the right kind of framework. So maybe we should do a part 2 on this and have you back, Ute, to discuss this a little more in detail. What do you say, guys?
Yeah, I like it. Let's have another jam session and sort of weld the two things together, the story framework and Ute's entire suite of workshop and account planning access.
Totally up for it. It's tremendous fun. I'm always seeing these big parallels. So yeah, we would be really interesting to dive deeper into this.
So there you have it, folks.
That's a wrap, as they say.
That's a wrap. Thanks for listening to this week's workshop edition of the podcast. That was quite cool.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.